I look back on my life and I see pain, I see frustration, and sometimes I see heartache. There are other times when I look in the mirror, and when I look in the mirror, I see pride, strength, and I see determination, because that's who I am. I'm determined. 18 seconds can change your life, or 18 seconds can be a lifetime. I am what is called a free Indian. Why am I called a free Indian? Because my great-grandparents and my parents never have lived on a Pueblo or a reservation. We have always been free. My great-grandmothers, one of them came from the Taos Pueblo in Taos, New Mexico. The other one came from the Picuris Pueblo in Truchas, New Mexico. And both of these ladies married white men. And one of the men was from Spain, we think, and the other one was from Ireland. And he was from Galway, Ireland, and I went to Galway in March of this last year, or this year, to visit my great-grandfather's homeland. I never understood why anyone would leave such a beautiful country as Ireland. But after I was there and found out that their history parallels those of the Native Americans in this country because of the British colonization of Ireland and how they were treated. Both of these men were Civil War veterans and both married Indian women. One settled in Huerfano County, which is east of Walsenburg, or the ranch that he settled in. He settled a 160 acres homestead in Huerfano County. That was my Irish grandfather. Then I have my other grandfather who came either from Spain or France. We do not know precisely where he came from, but he was also a white man and a Civil War veteran. Very proud heritage that I come from. I guess where I began my story is that I was raised on a cattle ranch in Earl, Colorado. And that was most of my upbringing. I was raised with horses and cattle and just had a good life on the ranch. But backing up to my great-grandfather, Duran, who they pronounce the name either Dura or Duran, and of course in Colorado they pronounce it Duran. And he settled in Honey, Colorado, which is just a small town, a small village, and he homesteaded 160 acres there with his Indian wife. They had 4 children, my grandfather being one of them. On this 160 acres, they raised cattle, and he did a little farming, and then he was murdered and left his wife, his Indian wife, with 4 children to raise. My grandfather being one of them, he had to leave home when he was 8 years old in order to help support his mother. On that homestead, which is still in the family, my grandfather was born on that homestead. My father was born on that homestead, and I was born on that homestead. And so that's where we happen to have our family reunions every 5 years, where the family meets. I guess I never understood being a free Indian, but my grandfather insisted on making sure that we knew that we had Native American blood in us. And he preached this throughout my lifetime, and we were very poor, being natives. And what he taught us was how to live in our traditional ways that his mother taught him, which was we went out and picked herbs for our ailments. We went out and picked pine pitch to make salves for sores. And we just learned to live off of the land. And that was very important for him to teach us, was how to live this. I grew up facing a lot of prejudice and being called, at 8, 9 years old, people would stop by and say, "Oh, look at these dirty little Indians." Or they'd say, "You know, the only good Indian is a dead Indian." That does something to your self-esteem as you're growing up. But I did have a strong father, and I had a strong grandfather who taught us that we had to live in both worlds, the Indian world and the white world. And so when you began to know that you have to live in both of these worlds, you do so. And my father's dream was to be a rancher. He wanted a ranch since he was little. He loved horses, he loved cows, and hated school. So my mother was the one that kept the books because she finished 8th grade. She was smart. However, we were a rodeo family, and that's what kept us together, was that we rodeoed. My father was a calf roper. We spent all summer rodeoing. And I had 3 brothers, and when you live out in the country, you don't have playmates, you don't have television, you don't have radio, you don't have any of those things. So our horses were our playmates. And I was riding from the time I was probably 3 years old, if I can, remember, see the pictures. So my parents would saddle up horses, and I had a horse named Glory, and I would ride with my parents. We'd go out and check the fences, we checked cattle. Sometimes my father loved to chase wild horses, which we had in that area. So I grew up riding. But again, the prejudice always seemed to come around. I'm 79 years old, and I have faced prejudiced people all of my life. But my parents and my grandfather taught me how to live with the prejudice and how to overcome that at whatever adversities we might have or what I had in my life. And so in 1952, my father was a rodeo producer by this time, and I lived at Earl, Colorado, and we had our cattle ranch there. It was my father's dream. His ranch was named Duran's Rodeo Ranch. We were the only ranch in Las Animas County that was owned by a Native American. It was all on a cash basis because nobody would lend us money, so everything was cash. So we had this rodeo, and I was a barrel racer. I loved horses, so it was automatically for me to be a barrel racer. My brothers were what they did was they raced the horses. So we had pole racing, we had relay racing, and I participated in all of that. And then we just raced against one another. And so anyway, we had this rodeo coming up in June of 1952. Clear as a bell how I remember this rodeo. Because I was competing against girls with thoroughbred horses, and their parents were pretty well-to-do, and we were pretty poor, as I said. And so I talked to my father about how I was going to compete in this rodeo. And the interesting part about this was at this particular rodeo, he said I could keep the winnings because I needed a new pair of boots. And my boots were old and ugly and wore out and too small. So we had a discussion on how I was going to participate in this rodeo. And he says to me, well, he says, all you can do is go out and do your very best. You know what your competition is. So I gave it some thought and kept thinking about this particular event that I would be going to. And just was sure that I wasn't going to make it because all of the rodeos that I had attended prior to that, I had either come in second, sometimes third, but never first, because I just was made to feel that I just wasn't quite good enough. And I kept looking at the day of the rodeo. I looked out and saw my classmates who had thoroughbred horses, well-trained, well-saddled, and they just really sleek horses. And I had a cow pony. And so I went out, and my dad said, saddle your horse, do the best you can, make sure that your equipment is in good shape and in good order, which I did. And all the time, you know how your mind wanders. Mine wandered, and I kept thinking, how am I going to win this race? I got out to the arena and saw the two girls that I was going to be racing against, and of course, they were so smug, and thought, boy, they really are going to win this race because they're just better than I am. So I continued to think about this particular race, and all of a sudden I heard my name over the loudspeaker. And I thought, oh, I'll never make it. And I was a good rider. I rode well. So in my mind, I'm going back to riding with my parents and the things that we did. And I just kept, the anxiety was building up in me of the rodeo. But I lined my horse up at the starting gate and waited for the flag. You know, the flag is up, and all of a sudden you see the flag come down, and I take off automatically. And the anxiety of being out there and knowing that I wanted to win in such a desperate way that I just knew that I had to win. So here I am. I went around the first barrel, if you've ever seen barrel racing. Went around the first barrel, cleared that one real good. Come up around the second barrel, and I thought, oh, your mind just goes through things, and I did the second barrel. I headed for the third barrel, and all of a sudden I felt my leg hit that barrel. As I'm coming back, the barrel turned, went this way, and all of this is split seconds. You think of this. And I, all at once, the barrel uprighted, and it stayed. And I thought, I am home free. So I start clicking home. And I heard the announcer say, 18 seconds. And I knew that I possibly had won this race. But again, your mind wanders. And it went back to how strong my father was and how he had talked to me the day before and that same day to make me realize and be more comfortable with the fact that maybe I had won this race. And I looked up and I saw my father in the distance talking to the timekeeper. And they were waving their arms and carrying on. And my father was a little 5-foot guy who wasn't very big. I don't think he weighed ever more than 130 pounds soaking wet. And here's this big burly guy yelling back at him, and I thought, oh, something's going on, and it's not good. So I come around and come up behind my father, and I just looked at him, and he was telling the timekeeper how he knew that I had been cheated out of not this race, but other races, and that he'd been to town and had bought a stopwatch. And he timed this race, and it was 18 seconds. But the timekeeper had always either added a tenth of a second to my time, which meant that I wasn't going to win. And you know, tenths of a second really do count when you're out there bell racing. So, of course, I had won the race, but my father taught me a very valuable lesson that particular day. He taught me never to allow anyone to to take my pride away from me and to be honest with whomever I met in this world, because that was so important to him, that I have this in me, this honesty that he thought was so important, because my father was a great man. And I thought, what a rare gift to have. I didn't realize it at the time, but what a rare gift to have from a strong father, to give you the pride, the determination throughout your lifetime, because he knew that I would need this for the rest of my life, because I was going out into the world where prejudice was the key thing. You had to be, as a Native American, I had to be stronger than the average person. I had to be more determined to get where I was going. And that's the lesson that my father taught me that particular day. He was my hero. And to this day, I still hear my father's voice in many things that I do. And so to me, those 18 seconds changed my life. And I want to thank you for listening to me this evening.